Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today we begin the phase of, having finished working on the genealogical proof standard, the phase of examining each one of the genealogy standards from the perspective of Craig R. Scott, not from the perspective of the Board for Certification of Genealogists. Everything that I talk about is just my opinion. So if we start with what we'll do today is do an overview, and then each week I'll do a video on a standard, and there are 90 standards if I remember correctly. So we're going to deal with each one of them day by day. Now the reason I'm doing this is if you sit down and read this book from cover to cover, you will get nothing. And the reason that you'll get nothing, or you'll get something, but you won't get the full flavor of what it's all about. And the reason is because you will be overwhelmed. The best way to read this book is to, in fact, read it out loud. I find that by involving as many senses as possible in examining something, that it, in fact, will make more sense to you in the long run. If I were to say to you, read a standard and then tell me about it, it wouldn't be the same thing, I think, as you reading it out loud and then telling me about it. And by doing them one by one, we have the opportunity to look at them over time. So each one has its opportunity to exist in isolation for a bit, whereas before they'd all be jammed together. Part of this first look is, and again, I hope by now you all own a copy of this book, because you can't be a genealogist if you don't own this book. Just like you can't be a genealogist if you don't own this book. Can't. It's not really a word in my vocabulary. According to my daughter, Dad, can't is not in your vocabulary. But you have to own this book. Now, is it necessary for you to highlight this book and make notes in the margins? I don't think so. Although, I mean, I've never done that. For some people, that might be necessary. My biggest problem in using this book is remembering what standard is what and trying to find what standard is what. And one of the problems is with this book is that there's no index. And I really wish there was an index so that I could find the standard that is bugging me. So, Chapter 1 of this book, of course, is the genealogical proof standard, which we've dealt with. And then Chapter 2 is standards for documenting. Well, remember, as a result of our genealogical proof standard, the end of it was, you got to write. If you don't write, it doesn't count. You've got to write it down. You can't keep it in your head. Recognize that what you keep in your head is not a source. If you write it down, that can become a source. Publishing something, writing something becomes a source. So there are standards for documenting, and that's where the next session we will begin. We will deal with those 8 standards that deal with documenting. Then after, interestingly enough, there are standards for researching that come before standards for documenting. And part of the reason for that is because of the use of citation and our need to document as we research. Write as you go is probably one of the most important things you can learn as a genealogist. Largely because as you're writing, you're in the midst of it. For standards of researching, we're going to deal with some subsets of planning research. We'll look at things like research plans also. Collecting the data, and then reasoning from evidence. And then something new in the standards, using DNA evidence. Now, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a DNA guy. I mean, I use DNA in my own research. I love DNA, but I'm probably not the best qualified person in the world to talk to you about DNA, except from the perspective of very basic information. So and that's possible here in the standards. This is why in 180, 90, 200 videos, you've never heard me talk about DNA. It's just because I don't feel competent. I suffer from imposter syndrome or something. So having gone through the pieces of research, we then will, in Chapter 4, deal with the standards of writing, where we will actually work with standards associated with genealogical proofs, assembled research results, and then the concept of special use genealogical projects. Then we will go forward, since my goal is to make educators out of all of you over time, because remember my 5-legged stool. We'll talk about standards for genealogical educators, and then we will talk about standards for continuing education, and then we will end it with a look at Appendix A and the Genealogist Code of Ethics, and we will compare the BCG Code of Ethics to the APG Code of Ethics to, I imagine, although I haven't looked at it in a long time, the ICAP Gen Code of Ethics, and see if there are any pieces in there that we need to be aware of from all of them in having our own personal Code of Ethics along with our professional Code of Ethics. And that will basically cover our examination of genealogical standards. So we will begin next week. One day every week we will deal with the standard. That should get us through 90 weeks. And the only reason I'm doing them once a week is because a couple of people have requested that I do one a week. And I can deal with that. So now we will have Book Sunday as a given and genealogical proofs, genealogical standards as a given every week. And of course, book for a discount somewhere along the way. So that's 3 out of 7 days taken care of. So much fun. Thank you all very much. So this is Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, where we're converting people doing genealogy into genealogists day by day. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Please hit that bell so you get notified every noon when a new video drops. Tell your friends. We're moving right along. Thank you so very much.